You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio with myself, Jimmy Petruzzi, and this is the Friday Sports Show. And we've got a really exciting show lined up for you this evening. Some really interesting guests, really exciting guests coming on board this evening's show. And our first guest is quite fascinating, really. She is a mindset coach, a speaker, an author, and I suppose she's a lot more to what the title says. There's a quite variable and broad spectrum that she works in, and she'll be able to explain in more detail what she does herself. And I think we touched on a few weeks ago with a coach who was a guest in the show, and we talked about how sports people have this sort of degree of uncertainty, because obviously the sports career in general as an athlete is a short career, and you want to achieve as much as you can in a short time. You've got your prospects of injury, of illness, of poor form, and at the moment we talked about how footballers are being released from football clubs and they don't know where they'll be playing next year, and they've obviously got bills to pay, kids in school, and all this sort of stuff. There's so much uncertainty in that respect, and we kind of see footballers as being these sort of iconic multimillionaire, but it's not always the case, and that's only a very small proportion of footballers anyway. But from a sports perspective, it can be a lot of uncertainty, and I think for me, in my experience in that industry, unless they seek out help themselves, it's not always easy to get the help they need and to help with these sort of things. And we've got an interesting guest, our first guest, who's going to sort of give us an insight in terms of the mind and what she does and how she can sort of help people and what she does generally to help people, because mindset has a huge correlation to how we do in life, not just in sport but generally speaking. And sometimes we forget that athletes and sports people are people just like all of us outside their training regime. They've got things that are going on in their life and so on and so forth that can affect their performance, and obviously that is equally as important as performance, their mental well-being to perform very well. So Caroline Reid, great to have you on the show. Welcome to the Friday Sports Show.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, fantastic.
Hello, thank you so much for having us.
Fantastic. So, Carol, tell us a bit about what you do. I mean, the listeners are probably wondering, a mindset coach, obviously you're a speaker and an author. Tell us a bit about mindset coaching. What's all that about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is one of those words, isn't it? It's like, what is mindset? Like what does that cover? Well, mindset is everything. If we were to see that our minds control everything from what we think all the way through to how we feel, our emotions that then affect our behaviour. So I sort of say it's a mindset coach, but really I do a lot of behavioural change with people, and that's such a range of clients that I work with. Everything from, I work in a rehab centre, I work with business owners all the way through to athletes and sports professionals. And the thing that I absolutely adore about it, as much as they all sound like they're a million miles apart in terms of where they are in their life and their career, the truth is that, as we sort of said, it all stems down to how resilient and how strong we are internally in our minds. And that kind of predicts our trajectory in life.
Yeah. So
does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting stuff. And what I find interesting is that your variability in terms of what you do, you work across a broad range of areas, and that's quite fascinating in the sense that you mentioned there rehabilitation centres, you mentioned there business people, sports people, and it's a high variable spectrum in the sense that obviously each individual comes along to see you for various reasons. And if you sort of give us an idea, or the listeners an idea, I should say, what you can do mindset wise. I mean, we all go through times in life, Carol, we have challenges and life's plans and that sort of stuff. And I mean, someone comes to see you, are you okay to give us an example in terms of how you can potentially help them to foster a more resilient mindset, to be able to get back on track, to get over a rut, so to speak, which we all get into sometimes,
Absolutely, and I think it is almost that, like, show us somebody who hasn't been through those challenges, setbacks or uncertainty in their life. So the first thing that we tend to look at is where they currently are. So where are you in your life right now? So that current reality, whether that is in their career, in their health, or purely their mental health and mindset. And the way that I sort of structure sessions and begin to really build is, I've always believed that we all have to have a solid foundation to build anything on. Imagine building a monument or a beautiful big skyscraper, and it was built on little pebbles and rocks and sticks and stones. It'll stand up. It'll be there. It'll be visible. But will it stand the test of time? And that is what your mindset is. So it comes down to your beliefs about yourself and the world around you. It comes down to that resiliency and your values. So resiliency being that bounce back ability that we hear so often in this day and age.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like a bit of a coined phrase now, but that resilience truly is such a fundamental part of building those solid foundations.
Absolutely.
And and your values. So once we kind of get that idea of where you are, what is, and as a fellow NLP expert, it's what is your map of the world? Like, what are your beliefs? And then once we've got a real clear understanding of that, we can then see, well, do they serve you? Are they empowering? Do they support the life that you desire? The level of happiness, financial, health, career, relationships. And if the answer is no, it's like, right, let's get in there. Let's start to have a look at what that picture looks like. What would that ideal situation be for you? And then it's a case of bridging the gap. And it isn't an overnight thing where you come for what, and it really is part of a process. I mean, I do rapid transformational therapy. So I like results. I want my clients to be able to walk through the door, they get their results, and bang, they can implement structures and techniques sort of straight away. So that's kind of the basis around mindset. And how does that explain how?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think from the point of view that, let's say, for example, you've got someone who's sort of cruising along in life, Carol, everything's going well, they got the professional contract in sport or football, for example, or they're aspiring to be a top footballer, and the world around them is great. They've got an exciting prospect of living their dream, or they're coming towards the end of retirement. So there's variable permutations in sport, and all of a sudden sometimes you get the rug swept from under your feet, where you're cruising along and you have a bereavement, you have an accident, an injury, or maybe a divorce, and these things happen. And I think the thing is that sometimes the perception, at least my interpretation, is sometimes that it's almost like we sort of forget that sports people have got these sort of lives outside the game as well, and things happen. And so you said start with where you are, and there's an irony there. I think sometimes, this is my sort of own sort of independent anecdotal observation, that sometimes you see people, they wait until the jigsaw pieces have sort of shattered everywhere. They wait till the glass is broken to start working on themselves. So they'll go across to a mindset coach like yourself. And I think there's a case for when things are going well to keep building that foundation and not take it for granted, because life's pretty fragile, and you're a day away from the rug being the rug being swept from under our feet. Absolutely. Do you think, Carol, there's a case for like seeing someone like you who you walk your talk, that I know, you're out there, you've got a very infectious personality, and you do really mean well. You do want the best for people, which is fantastic. No, you do, and you can see that. And I think, do you think there's a case for someone sort of coming along when things are going well, saying, Carol, you know what, things are going well, but I want to sort of keep improving anyway? Is there a case for that, you think?
Absolutely. Sort of going back to the case that, as you said before, I see it as like a mortality motivation. A lot of people wait, as you said, until life gets tough or the pain is just too much to bear. Then it's panic zone, that, right, and now I need to take action. But when it comes to almost that success mindset where you've gotten yourself so far and you can almost feel a slight gentle glass ceiling on the top of your head that you're like, I could break through this and I could picture myself going further, but what are the steps to take? And I think in this modern day and age in society, we get bombarded with take action, grind, find your grit and all of that lot. And don't get me wrong, we need that motivation and that willpower and, dare we say, that grit. But it all starts internally. It really, really does. And the more that we can piece those future jigsaw pieces together ahead of time, then that's where you're laying those solid foundations to begin, again, I'm still on about it, but to begin to actually move forward and move up.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, no, that's really interesting stuff. And, I mean, people from the outside looking in will say, look at Caroline Reid and think, well, maybe she's sort of naturally a positive person and they'll maybe look from the outside in and think, well, it's easy for you to say, and as people might do and that sort of stuff. But can you tell us a bit about your own sort of, how did you get into what you do, and how did you sort of get into doing mindset coaching, and what was your Yeah, absolutely. So my background before sort of stepping into the personal development and mindset arena was in performing and fitness. So I was a professional singer and dancer, and working a lot overseas. I did a lot of tours, and then the last big one that I did was actually in Ireland in the West End version of the Dirty Dancing tour, which was just fantastic. As you can imagine, it was like life on the road. And, and from there, sort of did a transition more into fitness. So I was loving what I was doing. But one thing that I noticed along the way was, being sort of a bit of an observer and a people's person, was that up and down of the roller coaster, and people's performance would truly be based on their mindset minutes ahead before either the curtains came up or they picked up the weights in the gym. Yes. And if they got up and had a bit of a dodgy day, I don't know, they might have got a flat tire or something happened in the workplace, or maybe a score didn't come in at which they really wanted, that would have a real knock-on effect on their performance. So it was definitely a mix of that, and I went through my own struggles. I kind of lost my own identity at one point. And so that was a bit of a wake-up call, but I'd say I'd lost my stepdad to suicide. And that was a big, what goes on between our two ears? And I mean, he worked for the NHS, the most brilliant guy, beautiful big smile. And it was in that moment, bam, big change of direction. And it was a merge of that, along with that real intrigue of what happens in our minds, the effect that has on everything in our life. That's really interesting stuff. No, it's really interesting because I think that, obviously you're out there and you're performing, and that sort of no doubt will influence the way you do things to a certain degree. And these significant emotional events that we have throughout our own lives have a big impact on our reality and going forward. And, if one can turn something into positive, you've certainly done it in the sense that you are now helping many people, and you're doing talks, and you sort of actively and proactively getting involved in, and have been involved in mental health and so on and so forth, which is a big area. Can you tell us a bit some of the stuff that you're doing around that area, Caroline, the mental health, and sort of, can you give us an insight in terms of some of the, I believe you're sort of co-writing a book, and you wrote a book as well. Give us an insight into that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So recently for it was International Women's Day, I was lucky enough to be involved in a book collaboration called The Woman I'm Becoming, and we supported a charity through that, which was just fantastic. And then that kind of gave me a bit of a light bulb moment of how, I mean, I've always wanted to write my own book, and it's up there, but I was like, how cool would it be to bring together lots of different people from the same sort of industry, whether that's coaches, psychologists, mental health experts, teachers. And we did a book collaboration for World Mental Health Day. So very excited to share that will be published on the 10th of October. And it's the idea behind it. So a lot of the workshops and talks that I do is about being a warrior, and in particular, a well-being warrior. And it isn't about fighting and going to war, or it's the complete opposite. It's about checking in with yourself internally and recognizing if the ego is playing up, recognizing if we have a bit of an internal battle. How do we form that peace? How do we form simple daily habits that support our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being? So yeah, I absolutely can't wait for the book to come out.
That's really interesting stuff. I think that's a really interesting take on it, Carol Ann. The idea behind the physical, mental, and I suppose spiritual as well. And when I say spiritual, in the sense that finding our own inner peace, whether that be through meditation, whether that be going for a walk, or whether that and that's really interesting stuff. And recently I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, a neuroscientist, and we sort of talked about how there's no real one reductionist method for many things around mental health. It's a collectively, obviously getting the treatment one needs as the first protocol, be it going to see their GP, whatever they need to do. And beyond that, obviously looking for other areas, if it's possible and advisable, to get the life back on track through behaviour, through physical, and whether that be a walk if possible, whether that be behaviorally socializing, whether that be exploring one's beliefs and values. That's really important stuff. And sort of going back to what we said before, the mindset. So, a lot of our listeners love their sport, and very, very privileged in this area to have some great sporting institutions and clubs and some great athletes in the area of Salford. It's truly a tremendous sporting city. It really is. And we've sort of seen the likes of Salford now. They're in league football, and just around the corner, just down the road, either way, you've got City, you've got United. So we're really, really privileged in the area for that. But you've got obviously a number of teams in the lower leagues too, and in some of these teams, players get released, and sort of going back to starting where you are, you get, say, for example, a footballer who's been released, and they may have a mortgage, they may obviously married, kids or whatever, or kids are going to school, they could be settled, and all of a sudden this changed, Carol. All of a sudden, you're cruising along and you think you've got your life mapped out. You're told by a club, I'm sorry, you surplus the requirements here. You've got to go back to the drawing board and find a new club. Can you see the uncertainty? And that's obviously any job, not just football. It can happen to anyone in any position. But from the point of view of football, let's say, for example, someone's faced with a situation like that. Do you sort of look again and reevaluate life, or do you sort of go back to basics, the foundation, or do you sort of, how do you sort of go in terms of starting with where you are? What are some of the things that you could possibly do? I mean, not sort of suggesting any advice, everyone's different individually, but just a bit of an insight. So, you get the call, Carol Ann, I've not been, let's say, for example, I've not been taken on by my club, I've got a mortgage to pay, my kids are settled in school, they've got to come out of that school, I've got to find the club. This is not me, by the way, it's a hypothetical scenario, but what can one do in those situations?
Good question. So I think with this, as you said, it's very unique for the individual, and in particular sports, that is life. It is, you eat it, you breathe it, you sleep it. So I think a couple of sort of maybe key steps to take, which I would sort of advise in a sort of a quick way, would be to truly understand that obviously all the best in the business experience it. And if you were to connect the dots looking back of who we would consider the best in the business, then they will no doubt have had that rug pulled underneath them, and we're left with a couple of choices. We either go, oh my God, my life's over, that's it, I won't be able to pay the bills. Sorry, kids, beans on toast for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And it's that like catastrophe mindset, which I'll be honest, we all slip into at times. It's totally normal. But it's recognizing that and going, hang on, okay, this isn't going to serve me. So shaking it off, I don't know, it may take an hour, it may take a day, it may take a couple of weeks, but understanding that actually sometimes these things, it's that thing, happen for a reason.
Yes, that's a great point.
Yeah, but it's almost choosing to see that, because people are going to say it to you and you could go, yeah, but we've really got to think, okay, where's this going to take me if I stay in I call it like a pity party, and we try and get other people involved with us. But it's a case of going, hang on a minute, this could be the best thing that ever happened to me. If we look at the big superstars in football, like we said, they will have had those
absolutely how you respond
to
the situation. Alternatively, sometimes it is what it is, and sometimes it is time to, pastures new, and we may not like what we hear, and that's just life. And in any industry where there's only so few make it, it's always challenging. And I think it's really important too, whilst you're on top of your game and doing well, to see people who deal with mindset and what else can I do, and prepare for every eventuality. So maybe you do an education, maybe you study, maybe you sort of develop yourself, because obviously, regardless of how good you are, there's going to be a point where it, not to sound pessimistic, it's reality. Nothing stays the same, and things will always change. And I think with yourself, Carol, what I like about yourself is that you've sort of been through it yourself in your own way from being a performer. And I think that, you would have experienced the sort of performing and being in that environment and the buzz and the highs and the lows. Then all of a sudden it's like, well, bang, reality. And for me, being involved in professional sport, a lot of the time has been like an outlet, an escapism. It's almost like, to somewhere to go. And obviously, other industries like that, I would imagine, are quite similar, where you just lose yourself. But there's going to be a point in your life where it's still, it's coming to terms with reality, whatever reality is. And that can be pretty tough, to think, well, we always think that things are always going to stay the way they are. We like familiarity. But sometimes you've got to take that deep breath and think, you know what, wow, this is it. And I think for me, that's a case for like seeing a mindset person, not just to be on top of the game, but also make provisions for life afterwards. And when you were performing, Caroline, just out of interest, did you think at some point, I won't be performing no more, or did it sort of cross your mind, and did you lay the tracks for what you're doing, now then, or was it something you just sort of fell into?
Yeah, so when I was performing, a memory actually just popped back to me. I just remembered that myself and my now husband, we used to perform together.
Wow.
And we got a contract to, as a duo, go over to Japan for 8 months. It was the most incredible pay, all accommodation included. And we had literally about to put pen to paper to sign, and earthquake.
Wow.
So the whole thing got pulled. So it wasn't even a fact of, it was something, a natural disaster, if you like. But then there's all the way through to, sorry, your shoes aren't the right size, or your feet aren't the right size, or you're not the right height, and bam, that's it, you're completely cut. So I'll be honest, I did start to think ahead.
Wow.
Over the last couple of years that I was doing the tours. And it actually made me really grateful for every moment that I was on stage, and every moment that I was teaching the choreography, or wherever it was that I sort of found myself in that time. And I did naturally begin to embrace the change. There was many days where I was like, oh wow, I have no idea what I'm going to do after. Absolute panic zone, would randomly hit at 2 a.m. like, how would I settle down? What will I do? But then I actually did reach out for a coach myself when I went through a bit of a crossroads. And it was actually in that transition period. And it was definitely the best thing that I personally ever did. And
yes, absolutely.
That's what then kind of led me to do a big transition.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting stuff. And I think, each individual obviously has got their own challenges, and a coach is not. There's that sort of fine line between clinical and performance, where if someone's sort of struggling, then the port of call, see the GP or clinician, in the sense that obviously these things are multifactorial, and it might be a case that they need the clinical help. But from a coaching point of view, I think that we can sort of set performance goals and reevaluate our life and think, okay, this is where I am. I suffered a setback, but equally in life works in mysterious ways, and sometimes you think certain things don't go away, but you look back in life and think, well, in a way it served me. I grew as a person, and I wouldn't be where I am now if that wasn't the case. So I sort of have the existential view on life myself, where I don't sort of get too carried away when things are going well, but I don't sort of get too downbeat when things aren't going too great, because I sort of think things will even themselves out. But the irony is, I think that when you look at things from an outside looking in, I tend to find, Carol Ann, that it's 6.5 to 1. Most people have similar challenges in life, and we sort of look at other people and think, well, that person, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, someone might, obviously look at someone like yourself, and you've done well and doing well, and think it's always been a bit of a smooth run. And we have this perception sometimes where we kind of look at other people and think, well, life's been a bed of roses for them because they put the smile and because they go out there. And that's the danger, isn't it, too, where we've got this sort of perception that. And we can become a victim too, can't we, in certain situations, and think. But I think it's great that people like yourself speak, and you can hear the story, and obviously people can see that it's you got to play your part as well and take some responsibility for yourself, because no one can do it for you.
Totally, yes, absolutely, and I almost call it like the Instagrammable lifestyle.
Yes.
No matter what career you're in, it always looks, we only really see the highlight reel of a lot of people's lives. But this is where almost that warrior mindset comes in, where, yes, if you are hurt, if you've been rejected, you've had a setback, you're in that place of uncertainty, it's choosing to either be a sort of, dare I say, like a victim to your circumstance, or seeing, okay, what can I do that's going to help me should this happen? So it's almost getting a little bit of readiness just in case.
Yeah, absolutely. The permutations. That's a great point, and you do that in sport anyway. In sport, you look at we can expect the best, but obviously we need to plan for all permutations to give ourselves the best possible chance in life. But it's been really fascinating. It's gone so fast that we could probably end up speaking for the next few hours and not cover it all. But just going forward, in terms of anything you've got coming up, Carol Ann, anyway, that if you want to, you're more than welcome to sort of share any contact details you may have. And is there anyone who sort of listened to this who might be interested in maybe reaching out, or do you have any contact details you'd like to share? Have you got any events coming up that you'd like to mention on the book? Yeah.
Thank you, very kind of you. So I do quite a lot of talks called mental fitness, like forming that warrior mindset. So I've got a few of those coming up around Manchester and Newcastle and London. In terms of dates and everything, I have actually got a website, which is www. and then Carol Ann Reid. Carol Ann is CAROLANN, and Reid is REID.com. And I'm also, we're all over social these days, aren't we?
Absolutely.
So you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Carol Ann Reid Coach, and LinkedIn as well.
Absolutely fantastic, Carol Ann. It's been a privilege having you on the show. I've really enjoyed it. No doubt the listeners have really enjoyed and found it fascinating, a fascinating take on perspective anyway, on the mind and mindset. Really, really fascinating. I want to thank you for coming on board the show, and no doubt we'll speak to you again at some point. Thank you, Carol Ann.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
So you're listening to 94.4 FM with Jimmy Petruzzi on the Friday Sports Show, the Salford City Radio FM, and we bring you guests from far afield, from around the world, from the local area, to give you an insight into the world of sport at the very highest level, at the level of grassroots and beyond. And it gives you an insight in terms of training and getting you involved. We want to increase. One of the goals of the show is to increase and give exposure to sports as much as we possibly can. And one sport I think that in my opinion, certainly deserves a lot more exposure in the media throughout the year, is a sport that, generally speaking, and this is only my perception, when the Olympics are on, we tend to sort of crowd around the TV and cheer the rowers on, and basically we kind of forget, I think at least certainly the general public do, that all year round they're competing, and there's many other tournaments as well, and world championships and European championships, and we have a very strong tradition in Great Britain of rowers. We've got the likes of Sir Stephen Redgrave, one of the greatest athletes of all time, if not the greatest. Sir Matthew Pinsent, the likes of Dame Catherine Jane Grange. So we have a great tradition in Great Britain of rowers. And today our guest is Ollie Cook, who's a British international rower. He's aspiring to be at Tokyo 220, which is a phenomenal goal to have. And he's going to give us an insight in terms of what it's like to be a rower at that level. So Ollie, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jimmy.
No, fantastic. And so do we start from the so what inspired you to be a rower? Great Britain's got a great tradition of rowers, and were you inspired by that tradition, or was it just something that you sort of fell into? What sort of inspired you to go into the field of rowing?
Well, it's a great question, and a bit of both, to be honest. I always saw rowing on TV, as you said, around the Olympics. It's something that, as a Team GB and from athletes all over the country, we've had some really, really successful rowers, and it always kind of comes up around the Olympic Games, or sometimes I'd see it at the World Championships or something, and always thought it looked pretty cool. But it wasn't really until I sort of fell into it because my dad was running along the river, I think, one day, and he just stumbled across a rowing club, and then he got into it, and I was playing rugby and was a bit of a loose end, and he said you should just try it out, and I kind of got into it a bit like that. So a bit of both. Like, I definitely saw the TV and saw the sort of stories about goal fever and the guys winning in 2000, and I watched the Olympics in 2004 and thought it looked amazing, but never thought that I would be in that kind of group of athletes. So I was very much sort of just taking it bit by bit, I suppose, and like building it up until it kind of became something that I was more invested in over time, I suppose.
That's really amazing. It's really interesting that you say, and I think it's really fascinating for me when, whenever I speak to an athlete and they mention how they saw it on TV, and it must be an amazing feeling to sort of have watched people on TV, then all of a sudden you're sort of thrust out there and you're amongst some of the people that you've watched. And what's the sort of buzz? I mean, what buzz do you get? Is it surreal? And did you, in your own mind?
Oh yeah.
It must be really.
It's really strange. It's really strange. But it's amazing. I mean, having we train near Reading, just off the M4, a small sort of town called Caversham, and that's where the national training centre is. And I was actually born in Manchester and grew up for a little bit in Boddington, and so kind of people come from here from all over the country, from Northern Ireland, Scotland, and from all over Wales and England and stuff. And we come into this place where we train, and it's a bit of a bubble, and so we just sort of train together, and we don't really see ourselves outside of the bubble until we kind of get to a competition time, and then it's on TV, and then you get people who you haven't spoken to in ages of saying, "Oh, we watched you on the weekend. That was great," or like really rooting for you and stuff. And you think, "Oh, wow, this is bigger than just an average training session or like a normal race."
Absolutely. I mean, did you? At what point did you believe, Ollie, that you could be amongst that level? Was there? Did you sort of from the off think, I can definitely get there, or was there a pivotal moment in your own career you thought, you know what, I can actually compete at the highest level, or was it just something that from the offset you felt, I can definitely get there?
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm going to sit on the fence again a little bit. I know that's a shame, but like a little bit of both. Like I never thought I could really do it, and I was very lucky, I think, to when I first joined the team, and I joined the team after 2012, and so a bunch of the guys retired after 2012, and I'd just left uni, and I was in the under-23 team, and so the group of us then joined the senior team, and to be really honest, I think for a while I couldn't believe I was training in the national team, and here were the guys that I'd watched race at the Olympics just that summer, and they were like next to me on the rowing machine, and I was like, this is really weird, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And then like there's a guy, an athlete called Andrew Triggs Hodge, who he's won 3 Olympic gold medals, and he retired in 2016. And he's a huge, he was and still is a huge role model for me, and in the sport. And I remember going down one day in Caversham, and I was just sitting on the rowing machine, and I had started mine a little bit later, so he finished his, and he stopped and just started cheering me on a little bit, and I can't believe this is really happening. I can't believe I'm sitting next to this total legend.
Yes.
But I quickly had to kind of move on from that feeling, because I was then competing against these guys. So then actually we were all now one team, and we spent most of the year trying to compete against each other to try and get into the selected boats.
Absolutely. And I think what's quite fascinating there is that you mentioned that you sort of broke through in the senior team and in 212, and I think that at that point it's almost like a transition for GB, in the sense that you had this sort of really strong tradition of rowers, and from for many years, you can sort of go back to 30-40 years, and certainly certainly in 212 the Olympics are in London as well, and it's a great meeting for Team GB across the broad range of sports, and rowing, obviously they put on a strong performance. So did you feel at that point there's almost like, or the generation coming through, there's almost like a bit of pressure to sort of carry the baton, because all of a sudden Team GB is sort of you looked at from around the world as being one of the strongest teams, and obviously yourself sort of making that transition from junior to senior level. Did you feel any sort of pressure? Were you just too focused on just doing the best you can? Did you feel that there was any pressure in keeping a legacy going at all, or?
Oh sure, yeah. I think we've had a bit of a change in the sense that when I first joined, there were a lot of the guys who were very successful over a few seasons and a few Olympiads were still going, and they really rode up to 2016, so I didn't really feel it. But after 2016, a lot of them retired, and we lost. I mentioned Andrew Triggs Hodge before, but we lost quite a few guys who were really, really successful over a couple of Olympic games, and we've got a very new team now, and in the last couple of years we haven't had the same. I'd probably fair to say we haven't had the same success that I think is in a way come to be expected of the GB rowing team. And we feel that pressure a lot, but at the same time it's not a kind of paralyzing pressure. It's a really, I suppose it's probably a bit cliche, but it's quite an empowering pressure, because now we are the team, and at some point the same people who we've looked at and were really successful, they were new, and they were starting their careers, or they didn't have success after success, and seeing that journey, and what has been, and I suppose is still the key thing for us in many ways, is that we still have our head coach is a guy called Jürgen Grobler, and he's been head coach of the GB team now since 1990. So he's taken all these athletes. He's taken Steve Redgrave and Matthew Pinson and James Cracknell and Tim Foster in that first kind of wave, and he's taken the new guys every time come through and made them into amazing athletes. So I think we have a lot of trust and faith in him, and I think he's won an Olympic gold medal at every single Olympic Games since 1976.
Wow.
So he's someone who really knows the sport inside out, and it's great to be part of his program.
Yes,
I think, and
absolutely.
And we take a lot of trust, I suppose, in knowing what he knows where we need to be, and he tells us if we're not. Pretty bluntly. But we know that when he's happy, we know that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that it's almost like you see it as a challenge as much as anything else to keep going. Would you sort of say it's a sort of challenge to sort of keep the levels going, Ollie? Would that be fair to say, or?
Yeah, definitely. It's wicked. It's a great challenge.
I mean, that's what it's all about, amazing. Really, for you guys. I mean, obviously, at that level, I think, for the listeners listening in, and they're probably intrigued in terms of what it's like to participate at the highest level, and no doubt to get there, you'll have had to have a mindset, a strong mindset, because obviously, there's only so many places, and also the training regime as well, which we can touch on shortly,
Sure.
the training regime. But in terms of your training, what in terms of, obviously, you periodise your training, and sometimes you'll be training a certain way to taper for certain tournaments, but can you give us an insight in terms of what generally a day is like for you training wise, Ollie? What sort of training do you do?
Yeah, of course. Like there's no real kind of like magic to it. We're full time, which is we're really lucky in the UK, and that we have a great funding structure behind the Olympic sports, and it means that a lot of Olympic athletes or potential Olympic athletes, those that are trained to try and compete at the Olympic Games, are funded mostly full time. So this is essentially their job, and it's not a rock and roll lifestyle. It's not like Man City or anything like that. But it's enough to like have a really good quality of life, and to be able to devote your kind of energy to training. But a normal day would be, we don't get up super early. A lot of, if there's any rowers listening, and they're trying to juggle rowing alongside school or university work or a job, your rowers are famously somehow masochistic, and that they enjoy getting up sometimes before sun. But we're lucky that we don't have that pressure that we need to get up. But so we'd normally start training around 7:45, 8 o'clock, and we'll do one long session normally first or something, and it can take about 2 hours. It might be on the water. It might probably, if it's on the indoor rowing machine, it'll probably be an hour, 75 minutes, something like that, and then we'll do probably weights as well, and then usually a third session most days of maybe slightly shorter, an hour and a half, maybe an hour. So we normally do 3 sessions a day, but it varies depending on if we've got a competition coming up, or we're trying to train a little bit harder or something, so we might do a little bit more, but it's more or less kind of 3 sessions a day, very steady, lots of aerobic training kind of thing, and then maybe some more intensity work as we get towards competition time.
Yeah, no, we obviously this is a tough training schedule in the sense that a lot of hours go in and a lot of effort goes in. I think that's what's really important there, as you sort of touched on funding, and my greatest concern was at one point, Ollie, I have to admit that after 2012, I was a bit concerned that the funding structure might change. And I don't know a great deal about the funding structure. I only know what I know from the outside looking in. But I know how important sport is to people. It's really important to me. It's important to the listeners. It's important to the country as a whole. And I think it's really important that the sort of funding keeps going, because, that sort of feel-good factor after London, after 2016, Brazil, doing exceptionally well in the medals table, third. Well, it was second or third now. Second. Yeah, I don't undermine the team. Second, that's an amazing achievement. It really is, to think that, for the size of this country comparatively to some of the much bigger populations and so on and so forth. And it's amazing, really. And to think that, I think GB gave, America a good run for their money in some respects.
We sure did. That's true, yeah.
And that's a great thing. I think it's really good, and people see and they get inspired. And, I'm not saying everyone's going to be an Olympic athlete. Obviously, there's a lot of things involved in becoming a top athlete. Obviously, there's a lot of variables involved, and genetic, and but it's great to have people participating. I think, generally speaking, having people participating in sport is what we want in society. I think it creates a more confident, motivated society, which is a great thing. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a misconception, at least in my opinion, around the funding, and sometimes people don't realise that the funding's great. It provides the athletes a platform to train full time. I think this day and age, if you're not training full time, it's tough, because a lot of the countries have got development programs where they sort of are able to do that. So to win medals, I think that the athletes do need to train full time. This is very marginal, isn't it? It's like 1% here and there. You got a tape, you got the big meetings. So I think that's really important going forward, and to give people like yourself the opportunity to train full time and have the best chance to win a medal.
Yeah.
What are some of your highlights, Ollie, in terms of yourself that you can sort of share? Obviously, had a great career up to now, and you got a long way to go. I'm sure there's a lot more aspirations you've got. But what are some of the highlights you can share with us so far? I mean,
yeah, totally. I mean, it's also sort of touching on something you just said. Like it's really cool to hear you say that, and it's amazing to get some of the feedback from some of your listeners and other people around, just to say that they've tried rowing, they've picked it up, and they're really enjoying it. They love being outside, and get being with other people and joining a club and the kind of community that is. And I think you'll find, like, in rowing as a sport, and it's pretty much like every sport really, but it's I know rowing, and I think once you start rowing, you've got a language in common, you've got experience that you can go down to any rowing club in the country or indeed the world, and it was a strike up and make friends straight away, and you also have a place to live, and and friends straight away. Just by having tried rowing, you kind of already got that sort of friends and a group of like people who you'll be able to kind of like get on with straight away. And I think that's something that's kind of really special. And I think in terms of like highlights, like a little bit kind of like playing on that a little bit is I think like one of the things about being inspiring for rowing is that some of the guys in the team here, like a lot of the guys here haven't always had the easiest route. They've had lots of like setbacks or like injuries, but have had to kind of work really hard and kind of get at it and things, and so it's not always the sort of most talented or the biggest or the strongest that makes it. And I think that's that's not always true. You can just be able to get someone who's just very, very talented, but a lot of the time, like, your kind of like grittiness and your like determination really makes up for like a lot of that. And I think for me, when I joined the team, I was saying to you a little bit earlier about joining, and I felt like I was joining a group of superstars, and I didn't really see myself at all like that. I just was like a university rower, and I did under 23s, but I kind of come fourth, but I'd only done 1 year of it. I was with guys who had won the junior world championships, and then the senior world championship. They just seemed like they won everything. And I think I came into the team, and I was a spare guy for the next 3 years when I was in the team. So I didn't win anything when I was here. I kind of came last in pretty much every form of testing, and then when it came to the Rio Olympic Games, I was the guy that didn't get selected. Everyone else, I was the one guy that got left behind in a way, and some of that time was tough. I've been training for 4 years full time, but I knew along the way I'd be making like little bits of improvements, and it was frustrating to be able to not make it, but actually I look back and I thought, okay, I was definitely kind of getting somewhere, and then it was really after the Olympics that I could start putting some of this into practice, that I really started to enjoy the sport and to enjoy some of the things that I learned. And so last weekend I raced the European Championships, and I was in the Formula 1, which is brilliant, which is the first time GB, the men's team, have been on top of the podium this Olympiad. And I think kind of, if I hadn't sort of had come short so many times before and kind of had to examine a little bit about what I was doing and how I was approaching my training, I wouldn't have probably kept at it for so long. And also I wouldn't have probably been in a position where I can kind of really enjoy the sport by knowing that there are things that I can get right, and I can enjoy that. So in terms of highlights, I think ironically I'm going to say, it doesn't sound like a highlight, but not making the Olympic Games in 2016, I guess many people know the guys who race, but there's always in every team there's someone who doesn't get selected. There's, even when you pick two captains and then they have to pick all the players they want, there's always one or two guys that don't get, the last two that get selected. And that felt like it was me in 2016. I was the guy that was standing there by myself, and everyone else was getting their Olympic kit, and they were talking about getting tickets for the games so their family and friends could come watch, and and I wasn't going, and I think looking back, it doesn't sound like a highlight, but it was an experience that I think has really shaped my kind of outlook and approach to training now.
Yeah, I mean, you refocused, and since then you've sort of gone on to do really, really well, and in the championships, the European championships, you sort of come back and obviously bounce back from that, and are really focused to get into the next Olympics. And in terms of yourself, I mean, that's a very philosophical way of seeing things, and obviously it can go variable ways when we do have those sort of setbacks that obviously beyond our control. All you can do is all you can do. Was there a pivotal moment for you where you decide, what, I'm going to dust myself off? And because obviously you've sort of been on the podium since then, what did it feel to get back on the podium after the you're going to call it not necessarily disappointment, but not getting into the 2016 team? What was it like to get on the podium after after not getting the Olympic team? And has that done you sort of built your confidence to know that you're on the right path? What was the feeling like? Yeah.
Oh, it was awesome. I think it was really cool. But I think one thing I've definitely felt, I don't know if you watched the film Cool Runnings.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I've seen it about 20 times. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a great quote in that. It says, "If you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it."
Right.
He's talking about winning Olympic gold, and for me, I think it's really resonated, because I was really gutted when I didn't make the Olympic team in 2016. And I thought that everybody was looking at me going, "Oh, there is Ollie. He didn't make the Olympic team. We're a loser." I mean, there may have been people saying that, but I think most people weren't. And I've kind of realized that actually, like, sport in a sense, you have so many ups and downs. You may be up to the world one day, and you might have no control, but you may the next day feel like you're bottom of everything. And actually, it's really important to remove the sense of self-worth from your kind of achievements or how things are going, because I find that's like it doesn't really change who you are. You're not a better person because you're performing better, because you can pull a faster ergo or you can go faster the water, but likewise you're not a worse person if things don't go. So I think it's really important, definitely helping me to sort of actually you're the two things are separate. You're the same guy, you're the same person.
Yes, a great point. That's a fantastic
so the feeling of being on top of it was brilliant, because it was kind of proof that things are working out, and it's great to be to have the team backfiring, and think we've had a few guys retire, but we're back here. We're putting up a fight. We're ready. We're taking it to them. So that's a feeling that felt great.
And for the listeners who sort of aren't aware, it was the European Championships. You won gold. Ollie, have I got that right? The Euro. Yeah, the European. So I sort of track the rowing and that sort of stuff. I have a keen eye for the rowing throughout the year.
That's great to hear.
Cool. I think it's a great sport, and I do enjoy watching it. It's one of the first things I watch at the Olympics, certainly, but throughout the year I keep an eye out and that sort of stuff, see what goes on. And for the listeners who sort of who only watch Olympics, it was the European, and it's obviously a tough field to compete in, the Euros, and for you to sort of be in a team that won gold is phenomenal. But also I think what's quite interesting is philosophical view on things. I think that's a really take-home message, I think, for a lot of people, particularly on the show today. I spoke to a mindset coach earlier, and she was talking about how we talked about our self-worth sometimes can be governed in a certain area, and one must have a broader view of life. But sort of going forward, I think that one thing that strikes me about the rowing team is that you guys set your sights on winning medals, on winning gold. It's a little bit like, say, not too far away from here, we've got the what they've called the gold medal factory in the past, the cycling team, and a lot of the things they talk about winning. It's not just about obviously going out there. In your own mind, obviously qualifying is first and foremost, but do you have sort of any thoughts in terms of yourself? Tokyo is going to be an amazing experience, I think, by the way. I think it's an amazing city to host the games.
I think so.
Any thoughts on sort of looking forward now? And obviously the objective is to get into the team. And do you have any thoughts on your aspirations going forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're right at the start of the season. So in many ways, the European Championships last weekend, they were a big race, but it's only the start. Next week we have a bigger race. To be honest, it's not the European Championships, but it's one of the World Cup series. It's 3 a season of World Cup races, and all of the crews that we beat at the Europeans are going to be there. So they're going to be out for a bit of revenge, which will be great. Yeah. But there's also crews from around the world who have, to be honest, for the last couple of years kind of set the benchmark in many of the boats. So we've got the Australians who are very, very quick, the Kiwis are very quick, and the Americans. So there's kind of, particularly those 3 countries, and the Chinese are going to be there. So in a sense, we're going to have to up our game, or raise it up for this next competition. We're all psyched to do it. We're looking forward to it. That's what we kind of train for. But it's going to be for sure. It's going to be another gear, and there's that race, and then I don't know if any of your listeners know about the race called Henley Regatta. That just happens down the south end. Sort of Henley on Thames, and there's sort of race there. And so we kind of like a kind of public race. We kind of race just on the river, which is quite unusual for us. And then there's another World Cup, and then that's in Rotterdam, and then a bit of a break, and then at the end of August is the World Championships, which this year double up as the Olympic qualification regatta. So you have to, depending on which boat you're in, you have to come in a top position to be able to qualify the boat. You don't qualify the individuals, you qualify the boat for the Olympic Games. So if you're in the 8, you qualify top 5. And the 4, I think it's top 7 or 8, and then the pair it's top 11. So that's on the sweep side, and then the sculling side, it's the same, but quad, double, and then the single. So it's a really, really important for us as a team to get that right. So this season is really about stepping stones on the way to qualifying the boats for the Olympic Games.
Yeah, no, it's just a really interesting insight, and it's been fascinating talking to you, Ollie. It's been really, really fascinating, no doubt, for the listeners to hear what it takes to be an athlete at the highest level, and the challenges, and obviously your philosophical views on your career thus far. And certainly I wish you all the very best, and no doubt we'll keep an eye out to see how you get on, that's for sure. And wishing you all the very best for qualification, and in the tournaments preceding qualification and beyond. So I want to thank you for coming on board the show. Ollie's been a fascinating insight, and we look forward to seeing more success from you. So thanks again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show.
Thanks very much.
Good. Thank you.
That was a really interesting insight into the world of top class rowing. It's been a fantastic show. The Friday Sports Show of Jimmy Petruzzi on 94.4 Salford City FM. Till next week, have a great weekend. All the best.